Right, next speaker. I'd like to introduce you to Carlo Giannasca. He's the partner of Frost Collective and also the head of Urbanite. Carlo's got over 30 years of experience in the industry. He particularly in the area of space making and place making. And I'm really excited to introduce him and bring him on stage.
Thank you. Okay, as Matt said, I'm Carlo Giannasca, head of Urbanite and partner at Frost Collective. First of all, I'd like to thank Matt and the Foundry for inviting me to be here with you today. So I'm going to do my talk in sort of three parts. The first part will be talking a bit about my background and my journey and how I got here. Then I'll talk a little bit about our process and how we do our work. And then I'll just touch upon, look into my crystal ball and touch upon what I see the future sort of trends in our industry. The Frost Collective is a interdisciplinary team of 50 people across 6 specialist businesses, including graphic designers, architects, interior designers, strategists and project managers, to name a few. So we're all kind of all under the one roof, and we believe in designing human-centred experiences that enrich lives. And our mission is to design a better world. At Urbanite, the team that I head up, our focus is to create inspiring spatial experiences that connect people to place. What I'd like to do now is just play a short video for you that will give you a bit of a flavour for the type of work we do, which will give a bit of context. So I'll just pop that on. So I'm going to take you through a bit about my journey so far. You can probably tell from my name that I come from an Italian background. My parents migrated to Australia in the late 50s, pretty much in search of a better life. So immediately after World War II, opportunities were very scarce and unemployment was rampant. This is their hometown, a little place called Mirabella, which is about 60 k's inland from Naples. It still astonishes me that they kind of had the courage to, leave their homeland, leave their family with little more than the clothes on their back and a suitcase to go to a whole new country that they couldn't speak the language, didn't know anybody. Probably much more courageous than I would. I don't imagine I'd have the courage to do that today. I'm going to just talk about my timeline. This image here just shows you pretty much the kind of breadth of my career as a snapshot. So I'll just talk you through the various phases. So the formative years, obviously, growing up, I came along in 1963. That's me with my sister. I'm not quite sure why she's half cropped out of the shot. I think she's been in therapy for 30 years or more. I suspect I might have been the favourite child, as male children are in traditional Italian families. I remember from an early age always being interested in drawing. I was always drawing and painting and creating. And oddly enough, my parents actually allowed me to express my creativity. And they even permitted me to draw on all the walls in my bedroom. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to track down a photo of it, but every single one of the walls in my bedroom was covered with drawings, and almost all the way up to the ceiling. This was an old Federation house that had 9-foot ceilings, and I literally was drawing all the way up to the to the ceiling. So it was pretty crazy. This drawing here was one of the earliest works that I could find. This was what I did for my Year 12 HSC art project, final year project. So pretty crazy pen drawing, which it's got a very pretentious title, which I gave to it at the time. But I always obviously had an interest in architecture, even from that early time. I guess I was fortunate enough that I actually found my passion early on in life, and much to my father's disgust, I enrolled at Sydney College of the Arts to study Viscom, because that was really what I wanted to do. These two guys here are my, I guess what I'd call most influential lecturers, Harry Williamson and Simon Pemberton. And they introduced me to modernism and typography, and it's a passion that continues to this day. These are four of my major influences. These are the Swiss type masters, Brockman, Hoffman, Ruder and Bill. And even after 60 years, I still think that their work still feels fresh and striking, because they really boiled down the essence of the messages they were trying to communicate to the absolute bare minimum. And they got rid of all, ornamentation. It was really just what they needed to communicate. If you're actually interested in learning more about this movement, I actually produced a presentation a few years ago, which is available on SlideShare. So if you just type in modernist typography, you can download it for free. And if you've studied Swiss modernist typography, these are the sorts of things that really kind of characterise it. It was all about, simplicity, using type as a graphic, using this really tight underlying grid structure, black and white photography, very minimal use of colour, and everything really just stripped back. And they also kind of really worked with very asymmetrical compositions, and it was really much a revolt against the sort of overly decorative design of the early part of the 20th century. One of the most impactful discoveries of my design education was the discovery of the grid. And I still vividly remember the aha moment when it all made sense, and suddenly designing became easier and faster. This is just an example of a grid that we used for a project that we were working on. It was a 14 by 12 grid, and then this is sort of what it looks like. So suddenly I kind of felt like I had the tools to actually create compositions, because I'd be looking at designs and thinking, wow, how did they get it to look so good and it looks so ordered? And it was only until I discovered the grid that it was like it all made sense, and it made, I guess, me a more efficient designer as well. Other influences included, for me, the Bauhaus School, and in particular the teachings of Herbert Bayer and Jean Sicol. Jean actually wrote an amazing book in I think it was in the 1930s on typography, and if you're really interested in reading that, it's a very interesting book. And finally, Paul Rand, whose work was introduced to me by my lecturer, Harry Williamson. This book is actually the first book I actually bought on graphic design, and I still have a well-thumbed copy of it in my library. And Rand was obviously one of the most influential designers of the 20th century, and I really loved his playful combination of type and imagery, and it really did inspire a generation of designers. This was my final year project. Wait, it skips around. Final year project at Sydney College of the Arts, and I developed an advertising campaign to dispel the misconceptions of AIDS, as it was called then. I did a lot of research, went into the HIV clinic in Sydney at the time and interviewed people, and really tried to understand what were the misconceptions that we wanted to communicate. And again, I used a lot of the learnings that I'd learned during college, black and white imagery, bold typography, to really sort of punch home the message in a really direct and simplistic way. My work was noticed at my end of year show, and I was actually offered a job that very night. So I went to work for an advertising agency, a boutique advertising agency called Davis Madden. And I went to work under the fiery art director, Martin Pollard. He was quite a character. And I was working on developing advertisements for our main client, which was Sri Lanka's national airline, Air Lanka. That's one of the ads, one of the first ads that I worked on. But again, similar to what Christiane was saying, I mean, advertising really wasn't doing it for me. It wasn't really what inspired me, what really got me excited about, why I wanted to get into the industry in the first place. It just so happened that at the end of 1986, terrorists, the Tamil Tigers, there was a civil war going on in Sri Lanka, and they actually destroyed a whole bunch of their planes on the tarmac. And so as a result, all our work basically stopped overnight, and they retrenched pretty much the whole agency. So there it was, just 12 months into my professional career, and I was out of a job. So I had to sort of regroup, and Martin Pollard, my art director, mentioned to me that this guy, Gary Emery, was starting up an office in Sydney. So Gary was based in Melbourne at the time, and he'd won a lot of work for the bicentenary, and they needed an office on the ground to actually manage that work. So this is one of the early photos I could find of our team in Sydney. We basically started as just a handful of people, and I was very fortunate to have worked with a lot of talented people that time. I learned a great deal from people like Penny Bowring, who ran the studio, great art director Graham Smith, who I learned a lot from at the time, and also one of my long-term collaborators, Ray Parslow, as well. During that time at Emery Vincent, I was introduced to the world of wayfinding. Obviously, at the time, Gary Emery was pretty much what we'd call probably the doyen of graphic design in the country, and also one of the sort of the early sort of initiators of wayfinding design and environmental graphics. And obviously, I learned an incredible amount. This is actually the first project that I actually worked on, which was a wayfinding system for the Downing Centre Law Courts that was designed in 1988. And I continued to work on many wayfinding projects over that time, including international projects like this one here for the Singapore Expo Centre, which I also designed the brand mark for. I also worked on many corporate publications. Obviously, graphic design was still something I really loved doing. This is the Leighton Annual Report, which I designed in 1990. This was actually pre-computer, so everything was hand-assembled. So everything was all cut up and pasted down and assembled that way. So if you guys, you're probably looking at it and thinking, how the heck did I do that? But we had like about 3 months to produce this thing. I actually went on to design the next 22 years worth of reports for this company, and formed an amazing collaboration with the one client that I worked with for that whole time. And they afforded me an amazing amount of creative freedom to design their publications, which was an incredible experience. I also worked on a lot of work with the Macquarie Group over that time, where I employed a lot of the basic tenets of Swiss modernism that I learned, everything from the grid to the sort of pared back simplicity of the imagery. And yeah, I put a lot of that, all those learnings through my work over the years. And also worked in branding work, developing identities for wine labels. In 2004, the Clemenger Group, which actually owned Emery Frost at the time, lured Vince from London to join the business as a joint creative director of the company. And then there was a short-lived company that was called Emery Frost at the time, combination of Vince and Gary. Gary was still sort of creative director of Melbourne, and Vince would commute up to Sydney and creatively direct the Sydney business. In that time, I continued to work on many wayfinding projects like this one for the Sydney Exhibition Centre. And a favourite project of mine from the time was this really extravagant package that we, when I look back now, extremely extravagant package that we designed for a cleaning company that was looking to win a contract to clean all the public schools in New South Wales. So we designed this crazy kind of aluminium cabinet that had all these aluminium folders that were all, sitting inside this thing, and it was super luxe. I also designed that custom designed typeface that you can see there, which was applied as little rubberized dots on all the folders, much like a braille. And also continued to work on publications like this one here for Supercheap. In 2005, Vince, myself and another partner bought the Sydney business of Emery Frost from the Clemenger Group, and so we launched Frost Design. And so was born that company in Australia. So with renewed enthusiasm, we built up a multidisciplinary business that continues to the present day. I continue to work across the whole business and continuing my love for wayfinding and environmental graphics. This project here was for the Powerhouse Museum, where I really set myself the goal of only using one typeface and one weight of a typeface and articulating hierarchy through the use of colour and contrast. So really kind of setting myself almost those little kind of sort of goals of communicating in the most simplistic way possible. Also continue to work across branding and poster design. This was one that I developed for a company called Tyro, where I actually channeled Paul Rand to develop an iconic word mark that communicated the way digital messages travel across their network. And I worked with Qantas for a number of years, and inadvertently on this project my role extended to photographer. We were on a recce walking across the tarmac, and I had the client with me and the photographer that we were going to commission to shoot the job, and I snapped the image on the right there, and it actually ended up appearing in the final printed report. It probably had nothing to do with the fact that I was actually the designer on the project. And now we come to the present day. Urbanite, the company that I now lead, established in 2014 when I created the Frost Collective. This is my amazing, talented team at Urbanite. So we're a mix of architects, interior designers, and graphic designers, and strategists and project managers, all amazing people. We work exclusively across the built environment, doing wayfinding, environmental graphics, and interior design projects across all industry sectors. Okay, for the second part of my talk, I'm going to take you through a little bit of our creative process and how we do things. Ultimately, as designers, we are designing for people. We're not designing just for our own personal gratification. And in order to do that, we really need to better understand people and their relationships with their environments, so we know where that experience can be improved. So when we undertake our spatial experience projects, we take our clients through a process. I'm going to play another little video here. If I click this, is this going to work? Is that starting? Click, yeah. So yeah, what we do is we basically get into a room with all the stakeholders and we actually kind of co-create the brief. It might surprise you that a lot of clients that we work with don't really have an articulated brief at the outset of a project, and we feel it's part of our role to really understand that brief and actually get it honed. But what that also does is it actually puts everyone on the same page, because everyone feels like they've actually contributed to what this brief is. So in order to do what we do, we need to build a profile of who we are designing for. So to design truly effective spatial experiences, we need to understand our audience and understanding their needs, frustrations, experiences, their characteristics, motivations, what drives them, and their behavioural patterns, and their profile, and their goals. And so all this information is typically gathered through face-to-face interviews, and we conduct these interviews when we're designing spaces along the whole sort of experience journey. So it's obviously critical to understand what experiences you want to deliver at all those points. And this is an example of a persona profile that we created recently for the Australian Museum project, where we interviewed over 100 people. And we typically create a number of persona types that we identify that comes out of those interviews. And what that produces is a rich layer of information that essentially kind of gives us that whole background information that we need to kind of create a really effective solution that really answers all the needs. And then what we do is we start to map out what we want them to think, what we want them to feel, and what we want them to do along every step of the experience. And we obviously consider what happens before, during, and after their visit to a site. So mapping this experience enables us to define precisely what is the opportunity and identify where the journey can be improved. This is an example of how we mapped an experience for just one of those persona types for the Australian Museum project. So, as you can see, it's got down one side all the goals, the needs, what we wanted to think, feel and do, and then across the top, the before, during and after experience. So you can imagine once you've got all this very rich data, how you can really create a very finely tuned recommendation. So it's quite scientific, as much as what we do is as much as art as it is science. At the core of experience is a person's reason for embarking on that experience. In other words, what is their intention? The Gensler Research Institute identified 5 experience modes that describes people's intentions. The first is what they call a task mode. In this mode, people are trying to accomplish something and are typically very focused. So they really want to kind of get to where they want to get to really quickly. So airports are environments where you'll find people in task mode. When we designed the check-in wayfinding system for Qantas a few years ago, we understood that we needed to communicate quickly and clearly because people needed to get through check-in as quick as possible. So we designed a wayfinding system that was really intuitive and really kind of popped in the environment so people could really access the information that they needed when they needed it really quickly. The second experience mode is social. In this mode, people's main intention is to engage with others. On this project for Westpac, we created these what we call graphic attractors that we inserted in the workplace in collaboration with the interior designers. And so subsequently people would be drawn to these spaces and socialise. The third experience mode is discovery. In this mode, people don't have a concrete plan, so they're happy to sort of explore. So for this project for Central Park Development in Sydney, we developed a self-navigating app that allowed visitors to the site to the freedom to explore and discover at their leisure. So it's obviously important to understand what modes you're designing for to accommodate that. The fourth mode is the entertainment mode. So in this mode, people are looking to be brought away from their everyday life. On this project for, skip back one. Well, that's very sensitive, this thing. On this project for the Nubo Play Centre, we designed this magnetic wall in the Play Centre that would allow children to sort of entertain themselves the old-fashioned way without any modern technology. And again, I'm finding this trend starting to sort of reveal itself in a lot of the work that we do, where people want to kind of get back to something which is a bit more authentic, rather than something which is technology-led. And the final experience mode is aspiration. In this mode, people want to connect to a larger purpose. Gyms, for example, are environments where you'll find people in aspiration mode. They're seeking to improve themselves and they're working towards achieving those goals. For this reunion fitness experience that we created, where we designed not only the brand strategy and the naming and the identity design, we've also designed the insides of the gyms as well. And we've created these sort of inspirational, aspirational messages that adorn the walls of the gym. When we design spatial experiences, particularly in corporate workplaces, there are a number of different purposes. The first one is obviously to inspire employees. For the American Express project that we worked on recently, we used Annie Leibowitz's beautiful photography to create inspirational insertions in the workplace. Illustrating companies' vision and values is also another purpose of what we do when we're doing environmental graphics work. Again, for the American Express project, I'll just click back one. Sorry about that. We worked with some of American Express's old historical imagery to use on some of the walls and meeting rooms. But what we did is we actually embedded the values and created those images out of their values. So, for example, all the different values then actually make up the images. And finally, representing a company's culture can be another purpose. We believe that obviously it's critical to authentically represent a company's culture. For Commonwealth Bank recently, our brief was to represent their culture of collaboration. They do a lot of workshops and that type of thing. So we developed experiences that captured and emphasised that philosophy. I'm going to talk to a bit about what we do in wayfinding now. And I often reference Kevin Lynch's seminal book, The Image of the City, in all our wayfinding work. In his book, Lynch argued that people in urban situations orient themselves through the use of mental maps. So people understand cities through recognisable elements that provide legibility and familiarity, and that sort of security of being in the familiar territory. As wayfinding designers, we believe it's important to provide them with those tools in order for them to orient themselves. Conversely, bad experiences can result in stress, discomfort and anxiety, the result being frustration. In his book, Lynch proposed that these mental maps are formed by 5 key elements. These are paths, edges, districts, nodes and landmarks. And how do we actually apply this to wayfinding? Because those principles are principles that have currency in urban design as well. And a lot of urban designers, architects, use these principles as well. And because the work that we do is so embedded with the work of architects and interior designers, we naturally follow these particular principles. When designing wayfinding systems, we always ensure that the paths are very clearly marked, making sure that people understand where they need to travel. For example, this one here that we did for the Early Learning Centre, we actually used some of the brand assets that we created and actually kind of imbued a bit of that humour into the wayfinding, and also taking into account that a large part of the audience was also young children. So speaking to that audience was also critical. We also believe it's important to signal these edges of those environments and really defining the boundaries of what we're designing. So for example, this project for the Australian Pavilion for the Venice Biennale, we kind of used the very powerful yellow colour to define the perimeter of the site through the use of even things like wrapping trees in yellow rope and creating kind of interesting installations in the space. Creating districts which have recognisable characteristics is also a powerful tool in orienting. For this financial institution that we worked with, a great illustrator, James Gulliver Hancock, to create these awesome little illustrations. And what we did is we then coloured them so that they not only harmonised with the interiors, but they created these sort of intuitive, recognisable zones within the lands, within the workplace. Nodal points in an environment are the best place to deliver information, because this is where people are typically looking to make decisions. This example for the Powerhouse Museum shows how we located signage at the base of a set of escalators, because obviously that's where people are looking to make decisions. And finally, creating landmark expressions in an environment to create points of reference which people can orient themselves. We collaborated with traditional Chinese paper card artists on this particular project to create a really iconic lantern at our Chinatown in Sydney. So when designing wayfinding systems, we need to sort of understand what all these tools are to better kind of help people understand the environment. One thing that I'm really passionate about when we're designing is to uncover what is unique about a particular project. I'm going to quickly share with you a project that we recently completed for the Northern Beaches Hospital, where we really tried to sort of draw inspiration from the surrounding environment. The Northern Beaches Hospital is located in Sydney's northern suburbs. It's nestled between the beach and the bush. And the surrounding natural environment were rich sources of inspiration for the architects and interior designers. So naturally we wanted our work to kind of take on and capture a lot of that essence in that work. So one weekend I set off to the national park and went there and photographed a bunch of images and really tried to kind of absorb the experience. Even had some encounters with the local wildlife. And what I did is I returned back to the studio with bags full of leaves and other artefacts, and had them photographed. We worked with a great photographer, a guy called Tim Jones, and we captured those in really minute detail. These are just some of the elements that we photographed. Close up of one of those. And then what we did is we then coloured them so that they would actually then match the interior fit out, showing how we coloured these. This is a sneak peek of what the environmental graphics look like in the space. The hospital isn't really open yet, so these are just some rough snaps that I took on my phone, but it just gives you a sense of kind of what it looks like in the context. Okay, another goal that we aim for when we're designing is to really sort of seamlessly integrate with the building architecture and interiors. And we love getting involved early on in a project to really, maximise our opportunity of embedding our work in the whole expression. When we worked recently with one of Australia's leading financial institutions on their new workplace, the architects came up with this amazing 7-level folded perforated metal staircase that ran through the middle of the building. I'll just flick through some of the photos of it so you can see it's a really, really cool installation. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to take inspiration from this staircase, and what we did is we created a series of bespoke letterforms that meant that our solution was unmistakably rooted in the uniqueness of the place. So these are some of the characters that we created, and as you can see, they're made up from sort of solid and perforated components mimicking the staircase. And then what we did is we super scaled them and made them really strong features in the stair landings that enabled visitors and employees to navigate their way through the building with numbers sort of confirming the levels that they're on. And what we did is we continued that motif of the folding and through to things like the directory on the wall that was painted, and also all the way down to the sort of the smaller signs like the toilet signs, where we continue to use the same sort of language, all the way down to the sort of playful graphic pictograms that signal the entries to the bathrooms. On all projects that we work on, we strive to sort of activate an organisation's brand in the most compelling way. Recently on a project for Goodman, we really had a very limited brand assets to work with. They had a frame, a green square, a plus symbol, and the logo type. So we got a brief basically to say that we need to activate our sites. We've got all these greenfield sites and we really need our brand to be amplified. So what we did is we basically created these amazing super sort of scaled elements that really get noticed and really kind of represent the organisation. This one here, we use the frame and it doubles as a sort of a gateway device into their properties. This one here is one in Shanghai. And then the green square was supplied to a series of flag files. So this kind of creates a really iconic expression for the brand all over the world. A critical aspect of our process is to actually prototype everything that we do, to test it and to make sure that it works. Initially, we produce things like what we call lo-fi prototypes, and we actually test them on site with the end users to ensure that it does work. So then what we do is we learn from that and we iterate and we improve the design. This one here is just showing just made out of cardboard. Also with the advent of sort of 3D rendering, you can produce incredible prototypes now. Like for example, Cinema 4D is a program that we use a fair bit of. And as you can see, it really allows you to produce, super complex, renders of designs. And what it does is it really makes you see, what it's going to look like. And the client can visualise the end product, which results in far shorter, approval times. And obviously the advent of 3D printing as well. I'm going to flick through this little video here. This is an animation that we created for that Goodman project that I showed you. So this is another way where we can actually demonstrate the work that we do to our clients so they can really sort of understand what it looks like, not only during the day but also at night, where we can kind of test things like lighting. So it really kind of, they can, it might as well be built because they can really visualise it, and it leaves very little to the imagination. So that whole kind of process becomes a lot more streamlined. Okay. And finally, we produce hi-fi prototypes. So these are full-size samples made of the actual materials. These are just some that we produced for the Northern Beaches Hospital. And if they work out, I usually end up with a smile on my face. Okay, the last part of my talk, I'm just going to touch upon what the future of design might hold. Obviously, it's impossible to talk about the future of design, and in fact the future of humanity, without mentioning artificial intelligence. Just to put it in perspective of what the impact of AI might have in our future, this is some data that I just recently sourced from the World Economic Forum. So as of this year, humans account for 71% of all the work that's done by humans and machines. In 4 years' time, so not very far, sorry, a little preview there, that's going to decline to 58%. So obviously we need to really kind of understand where that's all going. So some of you may have seen or heard this recent interview that Elon Musk did with Joe Rogan, and where he actually talked about what he thought his impact of AI would have in our society. And obviously this quote pretty much sums up where his head's at, where he believes that a scenario where humans merge with AI is the one that he believes will turn out best for us. And he's actually put money behind this because he's actually developing a company, Neuralink, that's actually developing implantable brain-human interfaces. We are already part cyborg with our phones, so I guess he's working on that kind of at the moment. So apparently he's going to be making an announcement in a few months' time. So what does this mean in terms of what we do as designers? Is this potentially how we might experience physical spaces in the future, where the virtual world is merged with the physical? Obviously, as a wayfinding designer, something like this would obviously be where it appears to be heading, but you never really know. Obviously, with increasing automation and AI, many technical skills are becoming instantly accessible and, as a result, less valuable. For example, Adobe Sensei is one of the things that they offer as part of the thing is, retouching profiles by the best retouchers in the world and then offering them up to anybody. So obviously those technical skills are not going to really have, a lot of value. I strongly believe that ideation is going to become, the primary skill of a creative as execution gets more and more automated and commoditized. And I believe as a result, ideas will be what are going to have the greatest value as creatives, as clients expect us to execute more cheaply and more efficiently. So to reference Buckminster Fuller, are we heading to utopia or oblivion? As Carlo Ratti thinks, oblivion is where we end up focusing on aesthetic problems as designers. However, if we achieve a utopia, we will achieve a utopia if we focus on tackling the more societal challenges of our time. So really kind of trying to solve those big world problems as designers. One company that I've come across that's focusing on designing for societal change is this English company called Pentatonic, where they're a furniture company, and they actually create products from food, electrical, and plastic and textile waste. So I'd like to leave you with sort of 3 key takeouts from my talk this morning. Firstly, seek to truly understand the audience that will engage with your work. Secondly, strive to uncover what is unique about your project and hero it. And then finally, uncertainty is the only thing that's certain of our future. Thank you.